The transport ship touched down on the distant world with a soft trembling sound that rolled through the metal floor, and Eli stepped out feeling the heavy air press against his chest as he stared at the wide fields stretching beyond the landing platform. The sky above was a dull shade of purple, and the sun was low, casting a warm light across the strange landscape. The colony was small, a cluster of domed buildings, connected by narrow paths and surrounded by high fences that seemed designed to keep something out rather than to hold anything in the moment. Ailey saw the faces of the people waiting for him. He felt a knot twist in his stomach, because their eyes told him this place was not an easy place to live. A tall officer approached and handed Eli a thin tablet that displayed his assignment in large bold letters: Caretaker of Production Unit 3. Eli read it twice and asked, "What exactly does this mean?" The officer gave a short, tired sigh and explained that the aliens who lived here, the tall, soft-skinned women with pale hair and wide, luminous eyes, produced a special milk, a fluid rich in energy and nutrition, more powerful than anything humans could synthesize. It was the reason the colony survived. The milk fed both the humans and the aliens, and it could even be traded to other settlements for supplies. Without it, the colony would wither and die. Eli was told that his duty was to make sure the aliens in Unit 3 continued to produce the milk without interruption. Eli was led through the narrow walkways to the low building assigned to him. The door opened with a soft hiss, and he stepped inside to see the alien girls standing quietly. Each one was tall, with soft, glowing skin and gentle faces. Their eyes followed him, but there was no fear, only curiosity. A soft humming filled the air as a machine at the far end of the room collected the milk from glass containers that lined the walls. He noticed that the containers were almost full, and the sweet smell of the milk filled the room, making it feel warm and oddly comforting. An older worker gave him a brief instruction about the delicate work that needed to be done. Aliens could not be treated roughly. They required kindness and patience. Their bodies would not respond otherwise. Ailey listened carefully and nodded, though his heart was pounding with nervous energy. One of the aliens stepped closer. She was taller than him, with flowing white hair that brushed against her shoulders, and her large eyes studied him without blinking. Eli felt a rush of embarrassment and uncertainty, but he reminded himself that this task was not optional. The entire colony depended on the success of his work. He was told by the worker that each alien must be cared for daily. Their comfort ensured their needs met, and their milk collected with precision. Any mistake could harm them and slow production down, and if production stopped, it would mean hunger for everyone, even death. Eli swallowed hard and promised himself he would do the job correctly. As he walked through the unit, he realized the aliens were not silent machines. They moved with quiet grace, and when he reached out to touch one gently, she leaned into his hand, her skin warm and soft like living light. He felt an odd connection, as if they could sense his emotions, and he wondered how the caretaker before him had managed to leave this post. The worker who had trained him briefly whispered that the last caretaker had failed and been removed without ceremony, and Ali did not want to think about what removed might mean in a place so far from home. Spent the next hours learning the tools and techniques required to handle the collection machines. He had to clean each part carefully and check that the flow remained steady. The aliens seemed cooperative, though their expressions never changed much. He could feel their eyes on him as he moved from one to the next, and he tried to speak softly to them, explaining what he was doing. Even though he did not know if they understood human words, it felt wrong to be silent. They responded with low melodic sounds that vibrated through the room like a gentle song. It soothed him in a way he could not explain. Sun outside faded, and the purple sky deepened into a darker shade. As night came, Eli finished his first shift and realized he was exhausted, yet something about the experience stayed with him. He had felt a sense of responsibility stronger than anything he had ever known. These aliens depended on him as much as the humans did, and though the task seemed strange and even awkward, he could see how vital it was. When he returned to the central building to report his progress, the officer looked at the data and gave a TV short nod, But before letting him go, the officer leaned closer and said quietly, "Remember, production must never stop. If it does, none of us will survive." Eli walked back to the unit under the dark alien sky and looked at the glowing fences that surrounded the colony. He wondered what was beyond them and why the fences were so high. He thought about the aliens waiting for him inside the warm building and about the warning the officer had given him. The words echoed in his mind like a distant drumbeat. Production must never stop. And as he reached for the door handle, he knew deep inside that this job was about to test him in ways he had never imagined. Eli woke up before the artificial lights of the colony began to brighten, and for a moment he forgot where he was. But then the low hum of the filtration systems reminded him he was still on this distant world, and the responsibility of his new task came rushing back. He quickly dressed and made his way to the production unit. The air outside was cool and carried the faint scent of the alien crops that were grown in the fields beyond the fences. The purple sky was slowly lightening, and the colony was quiet except for the muffled sound of machinery working in the distance. He felt a strange mixture of nervousness and determination as he stepped inside the building where the alien girls were waiting. Room was warm and filled with the soft glow of the containers that held the milk from the previous day. The aliens stood silently in their places, their large luminous eyes turning toward Eli. As he entered, he could feel their focus on him, as if they were trying to read his intentions. He moved slowly among them, checking the machines and making sure each one was functioning properly. He had been told that their milk production was linked to their emotional state, and if they became distressed or frightened, the flow could stop entirely. That thought weighed heavily on him as he reached the first alien and began the careful work of maintaining her comfort. The alien's skin was warm beneath his hands, and she made a soft humming sound as he adjusted the equipment. Eli spoke gently, even though he still did not know if they understood his words. He told her that she was doing well and that he would take care of her, and as he spoke he noticed the humming sound grew steadier. He felt a quiet relief at this small sign of progress, but his thoughts were soon interrupted when he saw that one of the containers was only half full compared to the others. He frowned and followed the connecting line back to the alien who was responsible for that container. She was standing slightly apart from the others, her pale hair hanging around her face and her posture slumped as though she were tired. Eli approached her slowly, not wanting to startle her, and as he drew closer, he could see that her eyes seemed dimmer than the rest. He placed his hand gently on her shoulder and felt her trembling. He remembered the older worker had told him that if one alien's milk flow began to decline, it could affect the entire group. He crouched down so he was level with her and whispered that everything would be all right. But inside he was worried because he did not know what was wrong. She made a low sound that almost resembled a sigh, and he felt an unexpected pang of protectiveness toward her. Decided to spend extra time with her, carefully adjusting the equipment and making sure she was comfortable. He even sat near her for a while, speaking softly, telling her about his home planet, about the seas and mountains and warm sunlight, things she had probably never seen. As he spoke, he thought he saw a flicker of light return to her eyes, and the trembling eased slightly, but the container remained only half full. Eli knew this was a warning sign, and that if he did not figure out how to help her soon, the entire unit might fall behind in production. When his shift ended, he went to the central command building to report the issue. The officer listened silently and then told Eli that there was no room for failure. Production had to continue at full capacity. The officer's expression hardened as he reminded Eli what had happened to the previous caretaker, and Eli left the office with a knot in his stomach. He returned to the unit, determined not to fail. The aliens were waiting quietly for him, and as he looked at them, he realized they were not just a task to complete, they were living beings who relied on him to keep them safe and healthy. That night a storm rolled across the horizon, lightning flashing through the purple clouds and the wind howling around the colony fences. The storm was unlike anything Eli had experienced before. The Walls of the production unit shuddered as the wind struck, and he could hear distant crashes that told him something was being torn. Apart outside, the aliens became restless, their humming sounds turning sharp and uncertain. Eli moved quickly from one to the next, trying to calm them down, speaking softly and reassuringly. Though he was terrified himself, he could feel the tension in the room rising, and he knew that if they became too distressed, their milk production could stop entirely. Was still trying to calm them when the power flickered once, then again, and finally failed, plunging the entire building into near darkness. The emergency lights snapped on, casting a dim red glow over the room. The machines had stopped running. Eli's heart pounded in his chest as he realized what this meant. Without the machines, the milk could not be collected, and if the system remained down for too long, the production could be ruined. He hurried to the control panel and tried to restart the systems, but the display remained dead. The storm raged outside, and he could hear debris striking the outer walls. He turned back to the aliens and saw fear in their luminous eyes. They huddled closer together, making soft, distressed sounds. Eli knew he had to do something quickly. He grabbed a portable lantern from the storage room and placed it near the center of the room to give them more light. Then he began working on the machines, manually checking the connections and looking for any way to get them running again. Sweat dripped down his face as he worked, and the red emergency light made everything seem more urgent. The hours dragged on, and Eli's arms ached from the effort, but he refused to stop. The aliens had calmed slightly as he moved among them, speaking softly and keeping them close together. Yet he could feel their unease like a weight pressing against him. Finally, he managed to reroute the power from one of the backup batteries, and a single machine sputtered to life. The sound was the sweetest thing he had ever heard. He quickly repeated the process for the others, until at least a few were running again. It was not perfect, but it would keep production from halting completely. As dawn approached, the storm began to weaken, but Eli knew the danger was far from over. He checked the container of the weak alien and saw that it was still only half full. He crouched beside her again and whispered that he would not give up on her. He would find a way to help her no matter what. But as he said the words, he felt the weight of the challenge ahead pressing down on him harder than ever. The storm finally faded, but the damage it left behind was clear. As Eli stepped outside the production unit, he could see pieces of broken panels scattered across the colony, and one of the fences was leaning dangerously inward, as if it might collapse at any moment. The purple sky was now heavy with dark clouds, and the air was thick with a strange silence that made the colony feel even more isolated. Eli tightened his coat and hurried back inside, because he could not stay away from the aliens for long. They needed him now more than ever. Machines had managed to stay running on the backup power, but they were fragile, and Eli knew they could fail at any time. The weak alien who had worried him since the first day was now lying down, her glowing skin duller than the others, and her breathing shallow. Eli knelt beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder, speaking softly that she was strong and that he was here to help her. He did not know if she understood his words, but he hoped that his tone at least gave her some comfort. Tried everything he could think of, adjusting the equipment, checking her temperature, offering her extra water from the supply lines, but nothing seemed to change the fact that her milk production was dropping even lower. And Eli could see the worry beginning to spread through the other aliens. They seemed to sense the danger, and they pressed closer together, humming in uneasy tones that made the room feel tense. He looked at the containers along the walls and felt a chill when he saw that the collected amount was lower than usual. If production continued to drop, the colony would not have enough to survive. Eli left the unit briefly to report to the central command building, and he found the officer waiting with a grim expression. The officer listened to Eli's explanation about the weak alien and the failing machines, then told him in a flat voice that if the alien could no longer produce, she would have to be removed. Eli felt a surge of anger at the word removed and asked what that meant exactly, but the officer only said that the colony could not afford to waste resources on someone who no longer contributed. He returned to the unit with his jaw tight and his hands shaking. He looked at the weak alien and knew he could never let that happen. He began spending every possible moment with her, speaking to her as he worked, gently brushing her pale hair from her face and telling her stories of Earth and the ocean and the warmth of the sun. He noticed that when he spoke like this, her trembling slowed and her breathing grew steadier. The other aliens gathered close, listening quietly, and Eli realized that they seemed to draw comfort from his presence and his words. But there was more trouble brewing, because the storm had damaged the outer fences, and there were creatures native to this planet that prowled the wild lands beyond the colony walls. Eli had seen them only from a distance, once dark shapes moving through the shadows with glowing eyes and long, sharp limbs. Now, as night fell again, he could hear strange sounds outside the unit, scraping noises and low growls that made the hair on his neck stand up. He checked the doors and windows to make sure they were secure, but he knew the fences were weak, and if those creatures wanted to get inside, there was little he could do. Aliens sensed the danger too. Their humming sounds grew sharper, and they clung to each other nervously. Eli tried to calm them, even as he felt fear rise inside him. He moved from one to the next, adjusting the machines, making sure the milk was still flowing. But it was getting harder because their distress was affecting the production. He knew that if the creatures outside managed to break through the walls, it would cause chaos and the milk flow would stop completely. Late in the night, as Eli was checking the containers, he heard a loud crash from outside and the entire building shuddered. He grabbed the lantern and ran to the door just in time to see one of the fence panels rip away and a large shadow slip through the gap. The creature was massive with long limbs and glowing yellow eyes, and it moved silently toward the unit. Eli's heart pounded. He rushed back inside and secured the door, hoping it would hold, but he knew it would not last long. He grabbed a metal tool from the workbench and stood near the entrance, listening to the scratching sounds as the creature tested the walls. The aliens were frightened now, their luminous eyes wide. As they huddled together, Eli spoke to them softly, telling them to stay calm and stay close. He wished he had more to protect them with, but there was no time to think. The door buckled inward, and the creature forced its way inside, its eyes glowing in the dim red emergency light. Eli stepped forward, his hands shaking as he held the metal tool ready. He shouted at the creature to distract it, and when it lunged, he swung with all his strength. Tool struck the creature's side, and it howled in pain. Staggering back, Eli grabbed a nearby pipe and swung again, forcing it toward the door. The aliens were making loud humming sounds, now a strange unified tone that seemed to fill the room with vibration. Eli could feel it in his chest, and he saw the creature hesitate, as if the sound confused it. He used the moment to push it back toward the door, shoving with all his strength until it slipped out into the night. He slammed the door shut and locked it again, his entire body shaking from adrenaline. The aliens gathered around him, making soft, soothing sounds, and he realized they had helped him drive the creature away. Their humming had thrown it off balance and given him the chance he needed. He thanked them quietly and checked the weak alien again. She was still breathing shallow, but her eyes opened slightly when he touched her hand. Eli told her he would not let anything happen to her or to the others. He promised he would find a way to fix everything. But as he looked at the broken fences outside and the low milk levels in the containers, he knew the situation was becoming desperate. The colony was on the edge of disaster, and if he failed now, they would all be lost. The night passed slowly, and Eli barely slept. As he stayed inside the production unit, with the aliens listening to the distant sounds of the creatures outside and the wind moving through the damaged fences, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him heavier than ever. Because the milk containers were dangerously low, and the weak alien lying in the corner was barely holding on, he knew that if she did not recover soon, the entire group could lose balance and the colony might not survive. He tried to push away the fear, but it clung to him like a shadow as he checked the machines again and again. When the artificial lights of the colony flickered on in the early hours, Eli decided he could not wait for help from command. He had to act. Now he walked among the aliens, speaking softly to them, promising that he would protect them, no matter what. They responded with gentle humming sounds, and he could feel their trust in him. It gave him a small spark of courage. He crouched beside the weak alien and held her hand. Noticing how cold it felt, he whispered that she was not alone, and that he would find a way to save her. Eli thought about everything he had observed since arriving. He remembered how the aliens seemed to respond to kindness, and how their milk production improved when they felt safe and calm. He realized that the bond between caretaker and alien might be far more important than the machines or procedures. He had been taught perhaps the milk production was linked to a deeper connection, something emotional that could not be forced by command orders. He decided to focus on building that connection as strongly as possible. He began spending extra time with each alien, not just checking the machines, but sitting with them, brushing their soft hair and telling stories of Earth. He spoke of oceans so vast that you could walk for days and still see only water, of birds with wings like sails, and forests where the sunlight broke through leaves like scattered fire. He could see the way. Their luminous eyes brightened as they listened, their humming sounds becoming steadier and stronger. The room began to feel warmer, as if their hope was returning. But Eli knew that kindness alone would not fix the broken fences or repair the failing machines, so he made a plan to divide his time. Half would be spent securing the colony, and half caring for the aliens. He gathered tools and extra panels from the storage building, and during the day he worked outside patching the weakest parts of the fences. His hands blistered from the effort, and the sharp wind cut at his face. But he kept going, because he could not let the creatures break in again. Every night he returned to the production unit, exhausted, but he pushed his fatigue aside to care for the aliens, especially the weak one who still struggled. Her milk production, almost non-existent. Now he stayed by her side, stroking her hair and humming softly to match the sounds of the others. He noticed small changes in her responses. She would open her eyes for longer, and once she even reached out to touch his sleeve. It was a small sign, but it gave him hope. Then one evening, as Eli worked on reinforcing the outer fence, he saw movement in the distance. More than one creature was circling the colony, now their glowing eyes flickering like distant stars. He realized they were gathering, and that the next attack would be worse than the last. He hurried back inside to warn the aliens, and as soon as he stepped into the unit, he could feel their fear. They had already sensed the danger. Their humming was sharp and dissonant. Eli knelt in the center of the room and told them he would protect them. He would not let the creatures hurt them. The attack came shortly after midnight. The creatures crashed through the repaired section of the fence, and Eli could hear their claws scraping against the walls of the production unit. He grabbed the same metal tool he had used before and stood by the door. The aliens huddled together, their humming rising like a strange song that filled the room with vibration. The door began to buckle inward, and Eli knew he had to hold them off, or everyone would die. He opened the door just as the first creature lunged inside, swinging the metal tool with all his strength. He struck it in the shoulder, sending it staggering back. But another was already climbing through the window. Eli fought with everything he had, dodging claws and teeth, his arms aching from the effort. The aliens' humming grew louder, and he realized they were helping him again. The sound disoriented the creatures, giving him precious seconds to drive them back. He grabbed the loose pipe and used it like a spear, forcing the intruders out one by one. He felt a claw rake across his shoulder, and pain burned down his arm. But he did not stop even as blood soaked through his shirt. He kept fighting until the last creature finally retreated into the darkness. When it was over, Eli collapsed to his knees, breathing hard, his vision swimming from exhaustion. The aliens gathered around him, their soft hands touching his arms and shoulders as if to thank him. He looked at the weak alien and saw that her eyes were open wide with a light he had not seen in days. She reached for his hand, and he felt a faint warmth spreading through her skin. She began to hum softly, and the sound was so full of life that Eli felt tears sting his eyes. He whispered that she would be all right, and for the first time he believed it. Next morning, Eli noticed that the milk containers were beginning to fill faster. The aliens seemed stronger and more connected to each other, their humming more harmonious. The weak alien was still fragile, but her milk production had started again. It was only a small amount, but it was a sign that they might survive. Eli reported the situation to command and told them that the fences had to be reinforced properly this time. The officer finally agreed to send a team, but they would not arrive until the storm season ended, which could be days away. Eli knew they had to hold on until then. As he stood in the warm glow of the production unit, watching the aliens work together, he realized that the bond he had built with them had become unbreakable. They trusted him completely, and he trusted them. He knew the final test was coming, because the creatures would not give up and the storm season was far from over. But he was ready now, because he had something worth protecting. The sky over the colony turned darker than Eli had ever seen. The heavy purple clouds pressed low against the horizon, and the wind screamed across the fields, carrying the distant sounds of the creatures that prowled the wild lands beyond the broken fences. The production unit was warm inside, but the air was thick with tension. The aliens stood close together, their luminous eyes shifting to the windows every time the wind howled, and Eli could feel their fear just as he felt his own, because he knew this storm would be worse than any before, and the creatures would come again in greater numbers. He spent the day checking the machines over and over, making sure every container was sealed and every line secure. The milk flow was improving, but it was still fragile. And if the aliens became too distressed, it could collapse completely. Eli crouched beside the weak alien who was finally showing real strength. Her eyes brighter and her milk beginning to flow again. He held her hand gently and told her she was stronger than she realized. She looked at him with an expression he could not quite read, but it filled him with hope as the first flashes of lightning tore across the sky. Eli gathered tools and barricades from the storage rooms and began reinforcing the doors and windows of the production unit. He moved with urgency, knowing that the fences outside were too damaged to hold the creatures back for long. He placed heavy crates against the entrances and tied loose panels to create makeshift barriers. His hands were blistered from the work, and his shoulders still ached from the wound he had received during the last attack, but he ignored the pain because he could not afford to stop. Night fell quickly, and the storm descended on the colony with a fury that shook the ground. Rain pounded against the walls, and thunder boomed like distant explosions. Eli could barely hear himself think over the sound of it, and then he heard the low growls outside. The creatures had arrived. The aliens huddled together, humming nervously as the noises grew closer. Eli picked up a metal pipe and took his place near the door, telling them in a firm voice that he would protect them. He would not let anyone be harmed. The first impact against the door nearly knocked him off his feet. The creatures slammed their bodies against the barricades again and again, claws scraping and teeth gnashing. Eli pushed back with all his strength, using the pipe as leverage to hold the door in place. But more impacts came from the windows, and one panel gave way, letting in a burst of rain and wind. A shadow slipped through, and Eli swung the pipe hard, striking the creature in the chest. It roared and lunged at him, but he ducked and shoved it back through the opening. Aliens began to hum louder and louder, the sound building into a strange harmony that vibrated through the walls. Eli could feel the energy of it in his chest, and he realized they were trying to help him again, just as they had before. The humming filled the room, and when the next creature forced its way through the door, it faltered for a moment, confused by the sound. Eli took the chance to strike hard, driving it back into the storm outside. But more shadows appeared at the windows, glowing eyes shining in the darkness, and Eli knew this fight was far from over. He fought with everything he had, his arms burning with effort as he swung the pipe again and again, each time forcing the creatures back, even as they clawed at the barricades. The aliens gathered close around the weak one, protecting her as if they understood. She was the heart of the group. Their humming reached a pitch so high that Eli felt the walls tremble with it, and then something unexpected happened. The milk machines began to glow brighter, as if the energy of the humming was flowing through them. The containers filled faster and faster, the milk inside shimmering with a soft light. Eli realized the emotional bond was stronger than he had ever imagined. The unity of the aliens was making them stronger, and in turn making the colony stronger. He shouted to them to keep humming, to stay together. And they did, their voices rising above the sound of the storm. The creatures seemed disoriented by the overwhelming sound and light, and one by one, they retreated into the darkness until finally the colony was silent again, except for the sound of the storm. Eli collapsed to his knees, breathing hard, the pipe slipping from his hands. The aliens surrounded him, their gentle hands lifting him up and steadying him. He looked around at their glowing faces and felt a rush of relief. It was over. The barricades had held, and the creatures were gone. The storm began to fade slowly, and the sky outside lightened as dawn approached. Eli checked the machines and saw that the containers were completely full, more full than they had been since he had arrived. He felt tears sting his eyes because he knew they had made it. When the supply ship finally arrived later that day, the officer who stepped off looked shocked at the sight of the battered fences and the exhausted caretaker who met him at the landing platform. Eli reported that production was at full capacity and that the colony had survived despite the storm and the attacks. The officer nodded slowly and said the word hero, but Eli did not feel like one. He felt only gratitude that the aliens were safe and that the bond he had built with them had carried them through the worst. He returned to the production unit after the report, and the aliens greeted him with soft humming sounds that filled the room with warmth. He knelt beside the once weak alien who now stood strong among her sisters, her luminous eyes bright and full of life. She reached for his hand and he held it tightly, telling her that she had saved them all. She tilted her head as if she understood, and in that moment, Eli knew he could never leave this place. He belonged here with them. The sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the purple fields, and Eli stepped outside with the aliens, watching the storm pass into memory. He thought about the future, and for the first time since arriving, he felt hope, not just for himself, but for the entire colony. He knew that there would be more storms and more dangers, but he also knew that they would face them together, and that their unity was stronger than any threat. As he looked back at the production unit glowing softly in the sunlight, he felt a quiet pride in the work he had once been embarrassed to accept. He understood now that it was not just a task, it was life itself. And as long as he remained at his post, the milk would flow, and the colony would thrive. Eli took a deep breath of the cool morning air and stepped back inside, ready to begin again.